Usually, quite often, one of the biggest attacks we have as Christians is really people think science has got all the answers. And that's not quite true. Science doesn't have all the answers. But they almost, mainly the evolutionists, think that they can call upon science in order to attack religion. My wife got a message the other day. I don't know whether you noticed last week, but there's just seen a bit of light from the beginning of the Big Bang. And it came on the news and everybody was watching it. And somebody said to my wife, what happens to religion now? They've seen the light from the Big Bang. Unfortunately, they haven't seen the light from God. Because he was there before the Big Bang, and he introduced that light. So what they're seeing is actually something that God did. And hopefully as we go through, we'll maybe develop that a little bit further. This is maybe going to be a little bit dry, a little bit boring, just to, put you in the mood. What I've tried to do, I was an evolutionist before I became a Christian, which is many, many years ago now. But it's always intrigued me, and I've always been interested in the arguments for and against and everything else. And with that in view, I've thought over the years, there's got to be a better way, there's got to be a simpler way of us tackling some of the answers that the questions that evolutionists throw. And this basically is a condensed version of some of the main things I think if we could actually ask them awkward questions with. And as it goes through, we'll hopefully see that develop. So that's basically the direction I'm going in. And if the technology works, then hopefully that's where we'll end up. Okay? So tonight, really, and tomorrow, but tonight especially, I talked about a reasonable faith. What is a reasonable faith? Is it more reasonable to believe in a creator God, or is it more reasonable to believe in evolution has produced everything we see, including ourselves? And so really, at the beginning of things, you've got the idea of Descartes once said, I think, therefore I am. I'm here. How did I get here, basically? What caused me? Because there's got to be a cause bigger than me that actually made me to be here. And so this question has troubled philosophers down through time. And I'm not the best philosopher in the world, but hopefully I'll give you some hints as to what some of the questions and answers that could be perhaps think about. So the question of cause and effect. It's evident that man in the world exists. Even atheists can't deny the reality, though if you think of existentialist philosophy, then they do deny reality. Even Plato himself thought of some of those along those lines and denying what was real, what wasn't real. But how did things come into existence? That's real, what we're going to try and delve into tonight, just a little bit. Whatever we believe about anything, there are underlying assumptions involved in whatever we believe. Now I'm going to give you a silly example, but just think about it, all right? And this is bad news for all those who travel and trade regularly, but bear with me, all right? Someone says to you, I see you go to Liverpool by train, what time are you leaving? And you say, well, 10 o'clock. And as soon as you say that, you assume certain things. You assume that the train will arrive on time, that there will not be a strike, there's no floods or accidents, nothing to block the track of the road. You make your plans because you believe that tomorrow morning or whenever, 10 o'clock, you're going to be there, the train's going to be there, and you'll be able to go off to your destination. Now I know if you commute regularly, that's not always your experience, appreciate that, alright? But if you assumed that the train was always going to be late, and then you made your plans accordingly, you might find yourself missing the train a few times. So in actual fact, you've got to assume that the train will be leaving when it says it's going to be leaving, and that you will be there in order to get on the train. Now, you'd be quite right to say, not only would you be right to say that you believe that that's what's going to happen tomorrow, but you could actually say, I know, because all of your plans are going to be based upon that assumption. You're going to meet that train, the train hopefully will be there, and you'll be able to get on it and get on with your plans. Now, the train example, that's a silly example, but the principle behind it lies in absolutely everything that we're involved in. We make assumptions day by day, practically everything that we do, we make certain assumptions, and that's really the philosophy behind what we're going to talk about. When we ask the big question, where do we or the world come from, we make our conclusions based on certain assumptions. Human reason will allow us only of two possible explanations. Well, if you read a lot of the philosophy and stuff like that, you find that you're forced back time after time to two assumptions. Either matter has always existed, or intelligence has always existed. And whatever else you see in between the clouds, if you can't see the forest for the trees, the reality is this is still the basic main question. What came first, intelligence or matter? Either something that always existed, or there was a time when absolutely nothing existed. And when we think of that, what we're going to do here in maths, if you're familiar with Boolean theory and stuff like that, and all that type of stuff, physics use it all the time, astrophysics use it, people go to the university if they do any sort of maths, come across Boolean theory. And the idea behind some of these things is very simple. You posit a view. For example, that door will open when I go through it, or the door will not open when I attempt to go through it. Okay? Now, there's your posit. Those are two options. And when you get to the door and you test your idea, it'll either open or not. If it doesn't open, you're stuck. Doesn't go any further than that. You can't go through the door. You can't go out in your car. You can't go wherever you want to go, because if you can't get through that door, that's you stopped. So A either works or it doesn't work. It opens or it doesn't open. And it's the same with this idea, where we come from. Is it matter or intelligence that's always been there? Now, a lot of people in the evolutionary field are very, very familiar with basic physics and basic maths and stuff like that. And yet, to me, one of the key elements that they overlook is this simple equation. If, then. If that's not the answer, then we're forced to go down this route, and therefore, might as well dump that, because you can't do anything else. It's all speculation after that, on this side, and then you work on the other. So the basic application here, if the answer is yes, you can continue with the application. This is a student, is he old enough to go to college? Yes or no. If it's yes, then he can go off to college. If it's no, he doesn't get in the door. Simple as that. You don't go what if he went to college? What would he do at college? All that doesn't even get a chance to start if he's not old enough. He just stops outside the college. Now when he's 18, then a whole new opportunity opens up. But if then applies that situation, alright? There's two choices. If the second choice is no, then that's it. Forget going down that route, because it just doesn't work. And that's the thing I think a lot of evolutionists are overlooking. So when we can't conceive of something coming from nothing, our mind refuses to accept the second possibility. Everybody, no matter whether atheist or creationist, believes something was there in the beginning. Up to about 1947, most scientists believed that matter has always existed. That was the always thing. And we're going to listen to a quote from a guy called Sagan later on about that. But in reality, when Hoyle put forward the Big Bang Theory, it certainly became a real thing, that here was a whole bunch of different answers to be asked. So if we ask where we come from, we're not only asking where we come from, we're asking a lot of other questions that automatically come from that. Where do we come from? How should we behave? Where do we go when we die? All these things come from that. If you're an evolutionist and you believe in an animal, then when you die, yeah, 6 foot, if you're lucky. Alright? If you're not, if you're a creationist, when you die, it's a door into a beautiful new world. So there's a total difference here in the answer to those questions, and therefore we need to consider the things. The big question then is, in the beginning, what? Has it always been matter? It always existed? Are we just a product of chance? Or is there intelligence behind the universe? What does if then deal with that? So the real question is, matter or intelligence? Now, this is really the first of 3 problems I'm going to posit, which means I'm going to throw out, and then hopefully I'm going to try and answer sufficiently. I don't know all the answers, basically because there isn't all the answers. Only God has got all the answers. But even in the scientific world or the evolutionary world, they don't have all the answers either. So this is 3 things I'm going to throw out that I think evolutionists have a problem with, and I think creationists have a big plus with. Alright, so the first one is the answer to this first question. You can't get something from nothing, therefore what has always existed? This gentleman here, Heidegger, said, why do we have something rather than nothing at all? Philosophers all down through time have asked that same question. We exist. What was before our existence? What caused our existence? Now, to suppose that in the complete absence of cause and will, nothing became something, it's almost too preposterous for even to consider. Nobody in their right mind thinks that we just happened from nothing. And that's why scientists, evolutionists today are pushing for, let's go to Mars, there's the answer. A couple of years ago they said, let's go to the moon. That's got all the answers. What happened there? They've got more questions, so let's go further away. How about Mars? And now they're hoping to jump onto this comet fairly soon, because it's got all the answers. I can tell you now, it won't happen. I can tell you now it won't happen. So what's going to come after the comet? I don't know, but it'll make up something new, because they're ignoring the if-then statement. The question is, has matter always existed, and has it been transformed to the present state by the process of organic evolution? So there's your basic question. Or is that which is eternal a mind, an intelligence, which we call God, who brought all things into being by his creative power? So in the beginning, something was there. In the so-called Big Bang theory, or exploding universe theory, I'm talking about believing as in creationists, I've come as close as we're likely to get to the concept that the universe of space-time matter, energy and motion was created out of nothing. And behind that, I'll explain, no, let it explain itself. They believe, and this is, grasp this, okay, this is kind of important a little bit. They believe that out of the cosmic egg, even smaller than a full stop at the end of the sentence, can you see the full stop? If you maybe have your own glasses on, but there is a full stop at the end of that sentence. That's what they claim. It's actually smaller than that. From a full, something smaller than that full stop you can see up there, all the universes that we know about, every bit of matter we know about, you and I, came from that point. The whole universe, they say, the whole universe came into being at some point in time, measured backwards by the speed of starlight, about 15 to 20 million years ago. They're a bit rough on exactly when, alright? Some people say, well, it's 13 and a half. Some people say 15, some people say a bit more. Primal matter, it's the base matter that everything happened to come from. It's supposed to be something that became hydrogen, possibly some helium from the very beginning. And from that hydrogen, a relatively small amount of helium, all the galaxies, all the stars, the planets, the comets, the asteroids, everything that we now see and everything that we now can't see, no matter how deep our telescopes go, were created. And this is often, if you look at some of the books they produce, this is a picture of the Big Bang and it's working, microseconds up here and then shooting off all the rest. They believe that through the stellar process, space itself expanded outward in a bewilderment of pure physics and chemistry, and this surreal light show were unleashed such powerful distortions that for a sub-fraction of time, the primordial anti-universe was curved to the nth degree. Some books you read talk about matter and antimatter, and this matter and antimatter were fighting each other out, and ultimately matter got slightly ahead of antimatter, and from that everything else exploded. Okay, you can do a bit like that. The extreme curvature, they believe, caused virtual particles to materialize from the previously undefined, because they don't tell us where it came from, quantum netherworld, worlds outside of our existence, in unfathomable quantities. He says you can't even think about these things, and I'm glad that they don't. But they ask us to. They believe that through the supercondensed ball of nothingness caused a weightless, undefined quantum mechanical probability framework through which a scalar field would eventually come. So it's all, simple stuff for us to understand. It's slightly different from Genesis 1, really. Anyway, they believe that the sound of the Big Bang, the very first tick of time-space continuum, this pinpoint of nothingness, that full stop, with infinite potential, in less than a millisecond, began to expand into 15 billion years plus light years in at least 4 different dimensions in time-space coordinates. So it was fairly simple, really. This guy, Sagan, he was a really virulent anti-God person. Some of you probably are familiar with him. He said the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. That's an interesting statement, but is it true? Did the universe always exist? If the universe had a beginning, then it needed a first cause. Now, If matter was that which has always existed, then there are certain questions. Did the universe self-cause itself? Because for matter to self-cause itself, matter itself would have to not exist and exist at the same time. You can do with that what you like. Really, the idea of something existing and yet not existing at the same time just doesn't make sense in the laws of probability and every other laws. So there's that law called the law of non-contradiction. And really, this says that's just not true. Something always was. And matter couldn't not exist and exist at the same time. So just, science itself, the scientific laws itself, says that what evolutionists say about this just doesn't work, which is interesting. This man says the second law of thermodynamics is probably the most powerful piece of legislation in the physical world. It ultimately describes every process we have ever discovered. It is the final court of appeal in any dispute relating to action and procedures, whether naturally generated or man-inspired. And it draws the conclusion that in our universe there is an overall reduction in order, a loss of available energy that is measured, and an increase in entropy. Fortunately tonight there's not many bald people here. Alright, but basically, if you're bald, you're seeing this second law in action. If you lose your eyesight, this is the second law in action. If you just had to fit new windows in your house, this is the second law in action. This second law deals with practically everything that we ever know, and it's a scientifically accepted law. It says everything is falling apart eventually. And that's an interesting concept. Because then, when you look at the next thing, it's beautiful here. If you ever go down to your local do-it-yourself and you stick a dynamite into it, obviously with maybe you shape it a little bit so you know where it's going to blow, and you've got a nice plot of land to build a new house, the result is something like what we see here. When all the smoke clears, where's the smoke clearing? There we go. That's what happens. That's what evolutionists say happens. You start off with an explosion and you end up with something complex. The second law of thermodynamics says, you start with whatever you want to start with, but you certainly don't end up with something more complex. You end up something falling apart. And instead of, if you left that house lying around 5 million, 100 million years, you'd end up with a whole housing estate. No, if you come back in 5 million years' time, you'll end up with a piece of dust. Because that house, no matter how good looking it is, will ultimately fall apart. That's the second law. It's an accepted law. Every scientist, evolutionist or not evolutionist, accepts the second law. Evolutionists thought something from nothing and simple to complex goes against this basic accepted scientific law, the second law of thermodynamics. And so, when we talk about an evolutionist, we talk about this is what an evolutionist sometimes expresses, all right? And I know it's a little bit tricky to hold on to. Watch the screen, don't watch my lips, try and understand it and follow it. It's a little bit complex, it's their words, not my words, that's the problem. What many fail to understand about the theory of evolution, spoken and written about by such an authoritative manner by many, is that it is not a scientific fact but a religious faith, and many varied system of belief about the origins of the universe. This faith changes from year to year on a regular basis, and new ideas are proposed and old ideas are rejected. I'm sorry, that's what I said. What do you say is coming next? Hopefully. So the question is, in the beginning what? Either matter or intelligence. Science says that by all the known laws, matter has a beginning and an end of uselessness. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Therefore, the conclusion that science itself gives is that matter cannot be that which has always existed. Now, even the Big Bang people say that. It's only 15.5 billion years old. I don't know how to measure 1.5 billion years, but it's interesting. But even 50.5 billion years ago, that's a starting point, isn't it? That's not forever. That hasn't always existed. It's come into time at some point in time. And so, their own laws, proper scientific laws, say that evolution isn't a scientific fact. It's a theory, but not only is it a theory, it's a faith. People believe in evolution not because of the scientific facts. They ignore the scientific facts. They believe in evolution because of theory, religion. On the other hand, Christians believe there is intelligence behind the universe. It's too much designed to be caused by chance. We believe in the beginning, whenever the beginning was, God created the heavens and earth. And that implies that God was there before the beginning, whatever the beginning was. Alright? And the passage, the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament shows his handiwork. When I consider the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars which you have ordained, just mind-blowing. There's too much complexity in our world just to have happened by chance. We're going to see that idea come up time and time again. As you notice here, or you maybe haven't noticed, I have a couple of props, and if I get them up properly without blowing them, you may see something. I want you to, health and safety-wise, put on your glasses. Okay, just be careful of your eyes, alright? If this works, this should go somewhere, but I haven't a clue where it'll go. So,
folded it over, so
yeah, that's true. So, what I want you to do is watch. There's two of them, and I want you to see what difference there is between each one. Alright? This is what we try and try out. Alright? Was that a spectacular or what? You don't see this one. You don't see this. Took your breath away. Alright, so we'll do a bit better with this one. I didn't want it, quit my neck to see you guys and cause problems. Try that. Alright. The part of the fact I held was slightly different, so one back up to the other. What difference did you see in that?
None. Come on, travel further.
The second one, okay. That isn't what I'm looking for. But that was really my fault, not rather than the balloon. They would have both traveled the same direction. Okay. Same way.
No difference.
No difference, and that's the real key. What you saw there was basically a scientific fact. Two balloons blown up to the same pressure, released by somebody competent in the same way, would have gone much the same thing. There's no real difference there. And that's what's happening with science, creation and evolution. When a creationist looks at facts, and when an evolutionist looks at facts, they see the same thing. Whether it's a fossil, whether it's a bone, whether it's a universe, they see the same thing. The difference is how they interpret what they see. I love some of these natural life programs, taking you to see complex life things, and then somewhere in the program he comes along and says, 400 billion years ago, where did that appear from? Where did that come from? I was enjoying that up until you messed up with your faith. Anyway, so that's really an important aspect. The question is not about what exists, the facts, but it's about the interpretation of how they came to exist. So that's the first problem. Okay, one of three, and I'm working. Second problem, you can't get blood out of a stone. Now, if you were married to me, I'm a Scotsman, all right? I've got specially lengthened pockets. There's a reason for that. I'm a Scotsman, see? You can't get blood out of a stone. And in reality, often, if you're poor and you go to the fridge looking for your evening meal, quite often there's nothing in there. So what are you going to make that night? Not a lot. You can't make much from nothing. If you go to the bank and say, I'm just going to draw out £500, and the bank manager says, well, you only got £5 in there. What are you going to get? You're not going to get anything because you haven't got it in there. It's a law. You can't get something from nothing. And we're going to look at this second law because the if-then statement really starts off, is there matter or is there intelligence behind the universe? And basically it comes down and says, matter is that point in time of beginning, therefore it couldn't have been that which had always existed, therefore you should dump that, because it doesn't go any further. You are then forced over to the second side of the Boolean chart, and it says, intelligence. It seems more like intelligence has always existed. And so therefore everything should flow out from that. That's not what they do. They ignore the evidence, and then they move on to the second question. So having said, all right, intelligence might have been there at the beginning to start a ring off, we'll move on to the second thing. If they believe matter has always existed, how do you get life out of matter? That's a good question. Either life came from non-life, or intelligence created life. Now here's your second Boolean if-then statement. All right? Either it's credible it's reasonable to believe that life came from no life. Pick up a rock, look at it and say, if I leave you lying around for 500 million years, you will turn into a living thing? I don't think so. But, you know, I use that in simple terms. And Tony will remember this from years ago. I use a cup, a simple cup. Most families, when you're talking to them, have got access to a cup because they should be inviting you in for a cup of tea. If you've got a cup there, you can say, if I held this cup up for 500 million, well, if this cup existed for 500 million years, would it turn into a tea set? That's not much to ask. I'm not asking it to come to life. I'm asking it to become a tea set. That's not a big deal. It could actually bring a kettle as well if it really wanted to, but I'm not asking it to come to life. And most people would say, that's stupid. Well, funnily enough, that's just about right. It is stupid. But if you left that cup lying around for 500 million years, what would happen to it? Logically, reasonably, you'd come back and find a pile of dust. Because that's what happens for 500 million years to some matter. Now, if Alan, I don't know what, I know Alan's skilled in certain things, I don't know how skilled he is, but if I gave Alan 500 million years to come up with a cup, I think you could make one. Matter of fact, I think any of us, given 500 million years to play with it, could actually make a cup. It's no big deal, is it? It's only a bit of clay, handle stuck on. It may not even be a pretty cup, but as long as it holds water and does its job, it's a cup. Intelligence can make a cup, but we're asking, evolution is asking a cup to make intelligence. Evolution is asking matter to come to life. Evolution says, and this is the thing I said earlier, I should have said now, 4.5 billion years ago, a young planet Earth was almost completely engulfed by a shallow primordial sea. Powerful winds gathered random molecules from the atmosphere. Some were deposited in the areas, in the seas, tides and currents, swept the molecules together, and somewhere in the ancient ocean, the miracle, that's a good word for evolution, isn't it? A miracle? They don't believe miracles. Okay. The miracle of life began. The fast organised form primitive life, the tiny protozoa, a one-celled animal. Millions of protozoa populated the ancient seas. These early organisms were completely self-sufficient in their seawater world. That's not amazing. It's good, isn't it? The problem comes from the next couple of statements. They moved about their aquatic environment, feeding on bacteria and other organisms. From these one-celled organisms evolved all life on Earth, from the Emmy Award-winning film, The Miracle of Life. I've got a couple of questions. I don't know whether you've noticed them. I've got a couple of questions. And one of them is, if they were the first things on life, where did the bacteria and other organisms they were feeding on come from? You're not supposed to ask questions like that. That's silly, isn't it, really? Anyway. One gentleman, a scientist, he says, making the building blocks of life is easy. Amino acids, you hear about it quite often. They find a piece coming from outer space and it's got the leftover bits of amino acid. Here we are, life in outer space. Okay? He said, just as bricks alone don't make a house, so it takes more than random collection of amino acids to make life. He says, like house bricks, the building blocks of life have to be assembled in a very specific and exceedingly elaborate way before they can have the desired function. Mr. Sagan again, he says, he's brilliant, this guy. He said, well, he's dead now anyway, but he knows different. But anyway, the number of possible ways of putting nucleotides together in a chromosome is enormous. A chromosome is enormous. A human being is an extraordinary, improbable object. And then he goes on to use the mathematical probability of how many different sequences you can use to make a biological function. He says, really, at the end of the day, it's so complex, it's more likely to be a misfunction. That's a bit high. I'll go down here. And natural selection. A careful examine of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be discouraged. I won't bother with that. That's about 700 actual creation-believing scientists say, you know, we've got big problems here, all right? Now, I'll stick with Carl Sagan. He says, let's just say one again then. That must have been your fault. All right, a simple cell. Okay, how did life begin? A simple cell. Well, there's a simple cell. And this gentleman up here, spontaneous generation, it's called abiogenesis. I'll put my teeth in later. The supposed spontaneous origination of life, living organisms, directly from lifeless matter. It's an ancient theory holding that certain lower forms of life, especially insects, reproduced by physiochemical agencies from inorganic substances, and has been specifically proven that this cannot happen. Louis Pasteur, who's been dead a while now, but lots of other people have replicated his experiments and come to exactly the same conclusion he did about the same time that Darwin was doing all his stuff. He says, it is impossible for life to come from non-life. He says it again a different way. He sealed the fate of spontaneous generation in a series of careful experiments in 1861. What are we in now, 2014? And we're still saying it's possible. And he said, no, it's not. And lots of other people after him said, no, it's not. But we ignore that, obviously. He demonstrated clearly that microorganisms are carried in the air and they grow in previously sterilized broths only when the broths are contaminated by air or similar sources. This is one of the popular things in our age. This is one of the things that evolutionists struggle with. Dr. Flew and his mates say they had problems with this one. Your DNA has 3 billion base pairs of separate chemicals. 3 billion base pairs of separate chemicals. Can you imagine what the odds must be in evolving, sequencing them in perfect order through chance and adaptation alone? Again, Mr. Sagan, he says the information, it's absolutely astounding. And he's talking about a simple cell, and he's saying it's comparable to 100 million pages of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, this is the guy who says it just happened by accident. All right? He says this accident actually is a little bit complicated. The simple cell we're talking about actually has got more information packed into it than 100 million pages. I don't know if there is 100 million pages in the Encyclopedia Britannica. I mean, I've seen the whole set. There's a lot of them. I don't think it is that many. And he's saying this is equivalent to a simple cell. He's not talking about a human body. He's not talking about an elephant. Might stick a million or two pages in an elephant. He's talking about a simple cell. And he says this is highly improbable. We should ask him a question, why did you believe it? Okay, this is a simple cell. It's a chemical factory. There's little motors, there's all sorts of stuff going on there. It's absolutely amazing what they're able to see now with their technology. And this is Dr. Flew, when he had a look at some of this evidence coming out from DNA and RNA and from genetics in general, he just said, you know, there's got to be design behind this. He didn't believe in the same God you and I do. Hadn't got that far before he died. He knows now. But in reality, he's saying it's just so improbable to think that all this complex chemistry can just happen by chance from basically stone, if you read some of the stuff. The importance of the argument from design, he says, biologists' investigation of DNA has shown by the almost unbelievably complexity of the arrangements needed to produce life that intelligence must have been involved, he said. Another quote from him. Flew has some similarity with American intelligence design theories. Now, we don't believe in some of the stuff the intelligence design people are putting out. But having said that, in behind what we do believe, God is making complex things on this earth. And because God's making complex things, he must be a pretty intelligent person. In a simple cell, in simple anything, you have to have ingestion, digestion, conversion to energy, excretion of waste, respiration, reproduction, circulation, growth, sight, locomotion, regulation, response to stimuli. Obviously, it doesn't apply to everything, but it's covered a good bit of the human and insect and animal population. We all need to eat, we all need to go to the toilet and all that type of stuff. It's a complex thing. A cell would not really be alive or survive unless all the life functions became operable at once. Now, we've got a doctor here, at least one doctor I know of, and he might correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I believe when a baby is born, one thing switches off and one thing switches on. In the sense of when you cut the umbilical cord in a baby, it goes from a life supporting on its mother to its own life support system. Well, it'd be interesting if you could cut it off from its mother and not start up. How many years, millions of years would you need to figure out, if you cut it off from its mother, it needs to start in its own system. You don't get that long, do you?
No, that's true.
This has happened the other way around. If it kept to its mother, then it probably could survive fairly well. But obviously, poor old mum would be having to take a disco with her, you know, and all that type of stuff. Mum, I'm going to university. You're coming. Thanks a lot. So there's this thing. It only happens once. How many million years do you get to evolve that? How many chances do you get? It either works or it doesn't work. And that's the thing that seems to be missing from some of their stuff. There's only two possibilities as to how life arose. One is spontaneous generation arising from evolution. The other is a supernatural creative act of God. There is no third possibility. Spontaneous generation life arose from non-living matter was scientifically disproved at least 120 years ago by Pasteur and others. That leaves us with only one possible conclusion. Life arose as a creative act of God. And I will not accept that philosophically, because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible. Well, that's a good statement from an evolutionist, isn't it? All right, let me read that again. That leaves us with only one possible conclusion. Life arose as a creative act of God. Our only one conclusion, he says. But then he says, I don't accept that conclusion, because I don't believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible. Now, is that science or is that faith? Okay. He's Nobel Prize winner. Living things always come from living things. Living things produce only more living things like themselves. Same species, Great Dane, Jack Russell's, all dogs. In nature, I've never seen a single exception to the basic law of science. Living things on earth were created by a living God who is supernatural, which means he is outside of nature. Poor old Darwin himself said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down, he says. Well, it's broken down. Whereas on the other hand, the Bible says, if you formed me in more parts, you covered me in my mother's womb, I will praise you. I am fearfully and wonderfully made, marvellous are your works. You know, God is absolutely wonderful. God is amazing. And we are truly fearfully and wonderfully made. An intelligent being capable of creating multiple universes would have no problem in creating life. So when you think about the first thing, what has always existed? God, intelligence. Could he create a universe? Yes. If he was capable of creating a universe, could he create life? Yes. And as the evolutionist says, matter has always existed. Well, no, actually it hasn't. Life comes from no life. Well, actually it doesn't. But still I'll believe it. That's interesting, isn't it? Third problem, and last problem, thankfully, okay, last problem. Everything came from a common ancestor or different species of kinds of life were created. When Darwin came to the Galapagos Islands, he saw many different types of finch. He saw ones with long beaks, short beaks, fat beaks, and all that other stuff. Different colours. He thought, wow, isn't it amazing, all this different variety. This led him to develop the evolutionary theory that over time, species must be able to change from one to another. He noted he didn't find any elephants on the Galapagos Islands. No finch had turned into an elephant. Right? I don't know why. Maybe he didn't have a long enough time. Maybe that's the answer. Evolution says fish, over time, can develop into birds and elephants. That's basically a condensed evolution. Fish, over time, can come from nothing, no life, into life, in the seas, then off the seas, into land, and into you, and into me, and into elephants, and into trees, and everything else. One branch of life all the way through. That's basically what it's saying. But as the Bible says, fish can develop into different varieties of fish. Can't do kippers, we do that. But it does all the rest, right? Birds can develop into different varieties of birds. Elephants even can develop into different varieties of elephants. But you still can't get a bird changing into an elephant. Is it possible to change within species, improve evolution? What about genetic mutations? So it's always mutations. There must be a good mutation out there that can then bring out something good. Well, we've got an excellent example about genetic limits on certain things with a mule. A mule is a hybrid and can produce only when a horse and a donkey breed together. But you can't take two mules, male and female, and breed them because they're sterile. This sterile aspect happens in every form of life. There's only so much variation you can do before you reach its limits. Evolution says, no, there isn't. You can change the variation as much as you like, and then you create all sorts of different species out of that variation. Science says it just doesn't work that way. Many experiments are done with fruit flies because of the fast reproduction life cycle. What happened? Two things. One, the mutant flies either died over a period of generations, or they came back to original normal conditions. They couldn't be changed. They were frozen, they were steamed, they were blinded by light and darkness, they were fried with X-rays, and they still remained flies. All right? Now this guy's trying hard. The first person who really did this was Mendel in his genetic law. He really struggled to try and break out of one species or another, and his conclusion was, it can't be done. Now, many modern scientists have duplicated his work, replicated and duplicated his work, and they've all come to the same conclusion. And you know, you can make as many, you can have a two-headed fly, a five-winged fly, a four-winged fly, a horsefly. I'm just a horsefly. But you can do all these different variations, but you can't get a fly turning into an elephant. That's just simple. Doesn't do that. And so they're stuck. The potential for change is limited. Mutations are rare, usually random, and usually harmful. Premature death and sterility are the typical results. Here we have what we believe in. We believe that you can take a wolf, if you go back in time, a couple of thousand years, and you can breed it into all sorts of different things. Breed it for going down a rabbit hole, breed it for chasing deer, you can do all sorts of stuff. So you end up with a Great Dane, and you end up with a Jack Russell, or even some of these weird things that are walking around under their arms now, and some even smaller than Jack Russell. You can all, but what have we all in common? What have we all in common? They're all dogs. You don't see them turn into lions. Don't even see them turn into cats. There are a limit to what it can change into. There's a limit to the diversity within the species. And we believe in that. Christians do not believe in the evolution of one species into another species, like a lion turned into an elephant, or a dog turned into a cat. But we do believe in the example of variations within a species. You can breed variation as far apart as a Jack Russell and a Great Dane. My friend is a proven fact of science. We see it every day in the varieties of dogs, different kinds of bills and finches, etc. Genesis 1 verse 21 says, God created the varieties, God created great sea monsters and all the creatures that glide and teem in the waters in their own species. The winged birds in their own species. And God said, that looks good to me. An intelligent being capable of creating multiple universes, capable of creating life upon Earth, would have absolutely no problem with creating a bunch of different species of different kinds. It's amazing, but it's really true. Okay? I'm winding up now, make me thankful for that. Real questions at the end of the day. What came first, matter or intelligence? Whatever you answer to this automatically eliminates the other, because you can't get something from nothing. Something has always existed. Is it more reasonable to believe there was just matter that always existed? Even recognized science to a degree today recognizes that's not true. Matter has a beginning, and therefore it automatically cuts out the idea of nothing. How did life come into existence? Evolution says chemicals give rise to simple cell amoeba. Problem, there's no such thing as a simple cell. Even the simplest cell is a complex chemical factory which requires an intelligent designer because of the design. And at the end of the day, everybody knows you can't get blood out of a stone or money from a Scotsman. Is that right? Where did all life's diversity come from? That's the third element. No matter how many different types of dog we can breed, there still remain in the dog family. You will never see in nature a dog turning into an elephant, either now or in the past. Creationists often appeal to facts of science to support their view. Evolutionists often appeal to philosophical assumptions from outside of science to support their view. While creationists are often criticised for starting with a bias, evolutionists also admit to starting with a bias. It is not a matter of whether one is biased or not. It is really a question of which bias is the best bias with which to be biased. Right? Which is the more reasonable belief? The debate between creation and evolution is primarily a dispute between two worldviews with mutually incompatible underlying assumptions. And I think it takes more faith to believe in evolution, and therefore I think faith in an intelligent creator is far more reasonable. I believe in an intelligent creator who made the world, who made man in the world, and when man went badly wrong and messed things up, I believe that creator stepped into the world to pay the price for my sin and to bring me hope and the opportunity of eternal life. We need to die with Jesus. We need to believe in Jesus. We need to die with Jesus. We need to be buried with him in baptism to rise to walk in newness of life.